We're good.
Okay, everybody that's online, we're about to go ahead and start. I just want to say thank you again for attending virtually as well, and for those who are attending in person. We're gonna go ahead and start. I'm gonna go ahead and introduce everybody to Dr. Corey Norfolk that works here at TCC, Tarrant County College. So you go ahead and come on up.
All right. We should ask to, do we need to turn on our mic whenever he starts talking? So that we don't have the feedback and everything? Okay. Hello, everybody. Maybe I'll stand so people can see me online. There we go. Hi, everyone. I'm Dr. Chloe Northup. I'm a history professor at the Connect campus, and I'm department chair. And we're so happy to have all of you here today to hear more about these important veterans. And today we are so excited to welcome Dr. William C. Meadows, who is an expert on Native American veterans. And I can't wait to hear more about his research and his talk and everything. He is a professor of anthropology and Native American studies at Missouri State University. And he holds a BA from Indiana University from 1989 with a double major in anthropology and history. He has an MA and a PhD in cultural anthropology from the University of Oklahoma. And we won't hold that against you that you went to Oklahoma, not Texas. He's the author of 7 books, 5 of which focus on Native American veterans. And he is an expert on Native American code talkers, art, maps, languages, geography, and tribal names. And in 2004, Dr. Meadows testified before a Congressional Senate hearing on the role of Native American code talkers in the United States Armed Forces. His testimony and research contributed to the passage of the 2008 Code Talkers Recognition Act, which is Public Law 110-420, which brought federal recognition for all Native American code talkers. He is also a historian for the Comanche Indian Veterans Association and the head of the Missouri State Native American Studies Committee. So thank you so much, Dr. Bill Meadows. Today, we are so looking forward to hearing more about your research on these Native American code talkers. Thanks.
All right, thank you, Chloe. And hello, everyone in Tarrant County, if I said that right. And thank you for inviting me to speak today. Just a little background. I started working with the Kiowa, Comanche, and Plains Apache groups in 1989 when I took my grad school, and my undergrad was at Indiana University, and so we're a basketball school, so I never got into that OU Texas football rivalry, so you can't hold that against me anyway, right? But no, thank you so much for having me, and what I'm going to do today is give you a little overview of both world wars, because a lot of people don't know that Native American code talking actually started in World War I and everything. So on the left here, you have some of the Choctaw code talkers with one of their officers in World War I. And to the right here, you have a Navajo gentleman on the island of Saipan in World War II and everything. So with that, we're just going to jump right in. And I have plenty of time later. I welcome any Q&A at the end. If you have questions or whatever, I'm happy to share. So I always dedicate my talks to this gentleman here, Forrest Castavoid. I was working with him on a related veterans project, but not about the code talkers, in my grad school when I stumbled upon found out that he had been recruited as a code talker and trained and used the Comanche language in the war. And that's what led me into my second book, my second project. And then once that book came out, I initially didn't necessarily have any idea that I was going to continue to work on the subject of code talkers. But when the Senate committee hearing came up in 2004, the phone has just never stopped ringing since then. So I'm still working on and have worked on several projects and papers dealing with code talkers. So I always tip my hat to Forrest because he provided this road. He got me on this road that I'm still traveling today in this line of research. So how and why did Native American code talking develop? So the first thing we want to get across is, well, what is a code talker? Well, it's essentially Native Americans in the United States military who used their native languages to send messages over phones, over radios, etc. And the whole purpose of doing it was that it was faster, it was secure because the enemy didn't have the knowledge of the languages or even the identification of many of them, and therefore much, much harder to break than anything based on English, which they were, of course, familiar with. So we get involved really in 1917 and 18 is when we get directly involved in World War I. We are, of course, aiding Britain and France and Belgium and everything before that. But most of the American involvement is really going to be very late in 17, but most of it's in 18 and everything. And the communication or the problem we're facing is a communications problem. And essentially, the American communications are compromised. Most of the things that we're trying to do communication-wise, send messages, the Germans are either able to intercept them or to break them and everything. So at this time, your communications are relatively a few simple basic styles. You have telephone lines between companies up on the front, and then they have wires back to battalions and regiments and bigger units behind them. Well, anywhere that someone can get close to that wire, all they have to do is clip onto it. And of course, it's just like a party line. You can just sit and listen in unheeded and everything. So you don't even necessarily have to get close to actual troops sometimes. Just anywhere at any point along that wire you can tap into. They have distance listening devices, and it's a complex kind of tool, but it basically works. It's like a large magnetic coil that's positioned towards the American side, and it doesn't even have to be that close. It can be 2 to 4.5, 5 kilometers away, and it can still magnetically pick up a radio or phone signal and draw it in, and it can be listened to. So a person can actually be in a fairly safe location while they're monitoring our communications. We had something called a buzzer phone, which it was a coding instrument in which it's kind of like setting type in a way. You enter your things and it sends messages in terms of lights that come on for certain lengths of time and buzzing sounds that last a certain amount of time. But it's very slow. That's the thing. You have to code it, send it, and then it has to be decoded. And time is precious in a military situation. So it's very slow and taxing, not effective. And then you have runners. You can physically write a message, hand it to a gentleman, and he takes off and runs it down the line or runs it back to the other levels and carries it forward. The problem, of course, is that the minute that a man jumps up out of a trench and starts walking or running, they know he's a messenger. And so snipers open up on them, sometimes machine gun fire, etc. So 1 in 4, it's very dangerous to be carrying message. 1 in 4 runners are being shot or captured. And so in some cases they're killed and the message does not get through. In other cases they're captured. So the man's taken as a prisoner of war, but also your message is in their hands now and everything. So the need is for secure and immediate communications. It's got to be faster. It's got to be secure. And it's got to be something that's faster than the existing coding and decoding methods that we had. And so, the technology at this time is really simple compared to what we have today, but we'll see that the native languages are really a cutting edge opportunity to advance this. So we have, for a long time, it was thought that the Choctaws were the first Native Americans to use their language as a code talking group in World War I. And myself, I believe that too, because that's all the information that was available. But the more I've dug over the years, we've discovered, and we still don't know the precise date with which some groups used it or started. So this chronology could be reorganized in the future at some point. But we have some members of the Ho-Chunk who you will popularly probably recognize more if I say Winnebago, from Wisconsin, who used the code a little bit in June, as early as we know as June and July of 1918. We have Eastern Band Cherokee from North Carolina, who use it in early October. And then we have both Choctaw and Cherokee that will use from Oklahoma that will use the code in latter October of 1918. And that's getting close to the end of the war. So all of these are really in the last few months, that last summer and fall of World War One. These are just some of their tribal flags and then showing where they're located at in terms of their respective states and everything. But the Choctaw are the best documented group in World War One, and that's why there's so much more known about them. But I continue to, I call it mining, but I continue to mine. Every now and then I find a little nugget of information that leads me onwards. This is some of the evidence for the Ho-Chunk or the Winnebago. One of the gentlemen, Robert Big Thunder, he was wounded in France. And while he was in the recovery, he wrote a letter home to his father telling him about what he'd done and things of this nature. And in the letter, he describes another place where they were invaluable was in transmitting telephone messages where there was a possibility of messages being intercepted by the Germans. In these cases, the Indians would transmit the messages in their own language. And so he ended up writing home a letter that actually got published in the Carlisle Indian School newspaper because he had graduated from there. We have what's called his Indian card at the National Archives. So you can see where it says wounded in France, over the top 3 times, also adopted the Indian code signal. The term code talker does not exist at this time. It will not develop until late in World War II. So a lot of times they called them Indian talkers a lot of times, or they would say they're using the Indian code, but everybody understood what it meant. But we have this information, confirming this individual's presence and things. This is with the Eastern Band Cherokee. They were in a campaign near St. Quentin and Cambrai. And they were running up against a situation where every time they tried to do something, the Germans were a step ahead of them and everything. So one day an officer was talking to another officer down the line, and he said something to the effect of, "How is it where you are?" And he said, "Oh, we're fine. The Germans have been shelling us all morning, but they're basically 100 meters off. Everything, it's not scratching us, it's hitting behind us and everything." Well, within a couple minutes, that artillery had been adjusted, and it started coming right in on top of where that officer was in a trench talking. And so they said, literally, "My God, they can hear every word that we're saying," And so they did a test where a couple days later, they sent a false message. They let everybody know in advance that it would be a false message and to ignore it. But the message said in English, 2 companies of men, a certain amount of artillery, supplies, etc., will converge and set up on this specific hill, and they gave the coordinates of it, and they will begin to fire at 12 noon precisely on German lines. Well, right when 12 o'clock hits on that time, the Germans just decimate that hill that they had sent the message about. Of course, Americans had not sent anyone up there. It was a test. And so they realized, yes, they're able to monitor everything we're doing communication-wise. So the regimental leaders got together. They called together the signal battalion officers, and they said, "Here's the situation we have. How can we remedy this? How can we fix it?" And an officer named John Stanley, who was in a lot of natives and a lot of non-natives were in the National Guard and got federalized, pressed into service and everything. So Captain Stanley had been in there before, and he said, well, in the National Guard, there was many Cherokee boys. He was from North Carolina as well. There were many Cherokee boys in the unit, and they spoke their language all the time. And if we were to round some of them up, I'm sure they could get the messages across in their language. And there's no way the Germans would know what they're speaking or anything. So it could be done in the open and really don't have to worry about them listening because they won't be able to identify or break it. So that's what they did. And it immediately allowed the Americans to start gaining ground and take the offensive and have successes again. So we have multiple cases of this where we know the starting to use the languages was working. These are the Choctaws, a few of the Choctaws that were used. So in the map in the upper left, you see that there's a big push towards the town of Sedan. And the reason Sedan, and then you can see some of the famous places like Chateau Thierry, Verdun, Saint Mihiel, etc. The reason the Americans in this region were pushing towards Sedan was that it was an important railway, like a center point or a meeting point of several lines. And if they took Sedan, they would sever the German army in half. They could not resupply men, and they could not resupply food and ammunition. So that was the idea, was to aim towards Sedan. Well, on the way there, they still have other positions and fights to encounter. So they come up the map here in the upper right. They come to this peninsula here. The Germans at this point have been pushed across the Ain River, all with the exception of this peninsula. And this peninsula had a considerable amount of height to it, so it was very defendable position. And the Germans still held that, so they could see anyone approaching them. They had some support from artillery nearby across the river. The French tried to take it twice and were repulsed with heavy losses and everything. So the 36th Division, who had just taken Saint Etienne and working their way into this area, they were given the assignment on this date, you will now assault this position and take it. So they had realized the Germans were cracking their communications. They also realized that the Germans were leaving, as they're retreating, they're leaving phones behind still intact, still wired up and usable. So they realize the Germans are hoping they'll just use their phones and they can continue to monitor. Well, the Americans picked up on that and suspected that's the trap that they set. So they pulled together a number of these Choctaws and also some Cherokees, and they sent messages out in these for an attack that would take place just a little bit after 4 o'clock that afternoon. Now, this is getting into November, so like now, it gets dark early. It gets dark around 5 or so. And so what this did was it put the sun, the setting sun, right in the eyes of the Germans. They're facing kind of westward and drawing the sun in their eyes. So the Americans started a artillery barrage in 3-minute increments. So if you look at those lines across the bottom of the hill, every 3 minutes that artillery was moving up about 10 yards. And what the troops were doing is they were rushing behind it. They were following the artillery very, very closely. And so when the artillery shut off, the Americans were right at the base of the position and able to just storm and take it very quickly. The artillery forced the Germans, you basically have to go down underground to escape it. And so that allowed the Americans the opportunity to force them to take cover while they ran up really close behind the artillery. So there were only 14 Americans lost in this whole action, and there was almost half of 500 Germans killed taking the position, and the other half taken prisoner of war. So this showed again that the use of the languages, they knew they could hear them and they could listen to it, but they wouldn't know what it was or what they were saying. Now, the Choctaws got relieved right after this action between the 26th and the 28th of October. And they marched back about 3-4 days to a relief camp and to have a week of rest. While they're there that week, there was an order. They used 8 of these Choctaws to do this. There was an order to increase that group to 18 and to have 3 non-commissioned officers with them. And so they spent a week creating words for things that they had realized are difficult to say in Choctaw. So things like artillery, things like poison gas, things of this nature, that's not in the traditional Choctaw vocabulary. So they created code terms, and they were heading next towards Metz, which is on the way to Sedan, and that's where they would have started using the code terms. However, they finished their training on November 10th, and we all know what happened the next day. The armistice signed. So they did not get to use the code terms, but they did use the Choctaw language. But I think what's important out of this is that this is the first recorded instance we have where they intentionally created code words. They created an idea or a template that will be expanded upon greatly in World War II. And we'll see that, coming down the pike. So all these groups made contributions in the area that they were used. This is Calvin Atchevit. He was awarded the Belgian War Cross for using Comanche. There was an action in which a group of the 90th Division was cut off and surrounded. And so to send a message for help in English, you would get overrun very quickly. So they got him, they called up another Comanche, and they started using the Comanches on the phone to do the messages. And so they were able to save that unit and everything without compromising its position. And so again, his Indian card also records that he used the language across. He also, in another action, he was shot through the arm very badly. But with one arm, he got a rifle and he was able to kill a German soldier and take another one prisoner with just the one arm and the rifle. So he won a Distinguished Service Cross for that. But we have newspaper articles and his Indian card file and things that show that he was awarded this specifically for the code talking and everything. This is just a chart of some of the groups that we've been able to identify. Some of them we know the precise company, division, regiment, etc. We know the precise number of some of the groups that were used. And these are not big groups of men. You don't need that many of them. It's just having them in the key locations, because the idea is they pass the messages and then they turn right back around and put them into English, and then they can be passed on in English behind the to the unit there and everything, and that's the advantage of it. Whereas coding something and sending it and decoding it, you can really run into some time there, like an hour and a half or more sometimes to do that. And here it's as quick as I'm talking to you on the Zoom here, and you can talk back to me, and then turn around and tell someone else something, But there's 7 groups that we have identified definitely, and mention of another, but not solid yet in terms of records. Now, when you say a code, one of the first words that anybody, myself included, think of, you think, well, it's got to be kept secret or it's ineffective, right? It doesn't work. But immediately, as soon as the war ended, there are newspaper articles all over the place. So Choctaw tongue gave surprise to the Germans. And this is from a report that the colonel of the regiment reported and everything like that. If you notice real closely, it was run in a newspaper in Flagny, France on February 27th of 1919. So the troops are still over there doing the kind of the occupation before they come home. And then very quickly in January and March, etc., we start getting articles. This one over here is again talking about them. Indian tongue used as code to dodge spies. Enemy listeners couldn't translate army orders sent in Choctaw. So there's no effort to keep this secret. People thought this was the war to end all wars. There wouldn't be another one. And so it also was not an existing plan. It was nothing that was in the military manuals or the strategy. This is something that was just made up on the field to solve problems as it came along. And several groups had the same basic idea, but there was no plan to do this entering into the war or anything. But we have even 2-star generals, in charge of a division. We have colonels, we have majors, we have very high-ranking officials, military officials, giving public talks about this, giving newspaper interviews. So no effort to keep it secret. There were some French decorations for individual Choctaws, but not for code talking. It was just for individual actions and things of that nature for bravery. And there's some that won Croix de Guerre and other awards like that. There are a lot of mentions of code talkers in the newspaper. Like I said, there's several mentions of them in the autobiographies of officers. A lot of officers would write their memoirs or their their war experience and publish it as a book and something. So there's a lot of mentions of them in there. There is a Choctaw who was offered a movie deal. He was not a code talker, but he was in the same units where they came from, and was offered a movie deal similar to the Sergeant Alvin York experience. He captured a lot of Germans and everything of that nature, but he turned the movie down. He didn't want to relocate to California and do that. So there's no really official U.S. recognition. And from today's viewpoint, we got to remember, don't think of what we would do today. Think of what people did back then. And so it's not uncommon to be in the military. And for example, there's a gentleman in the Cherokee who was actually a cook, but they needed speakers to send messages. So they pulled him out of the kitchen as a cook, and he became a radio man. You just do whatever you have to do to adapt to the situation. So you might be asked to fill in or ordered to fill in for many types of positions. So they don't really necessarily, even the natives themselves didn't look at it as some super unique thing they should be recognized from. They were just asked, can you send this in their language? They're like, yeah, happy to. And I'm sure, they were proud of it and everything, being able to use their language and something unique from their background. But again, no real recognition. But the Army doesn't forget this. It's in the newspapers. They even ran a couple articles in the Stars and Stripes, the newspaper, the Army's newspaper, official newspaper. So again, if you wanted to keep it secret, you would have not been publishing those kinds of things. But they're aware of it. So it's going to come back up a short time later, barely 20 years when we get involved in World War II. So what's going on shortly before World War II? Well, one of the things we haven't mentioned yet, and is one of the probably the greatest irony of this whole experience, is that these men that were in World War I, the Native men, and many of them that went in World War II, had been sent as fairly young children to Indian boarding schools, some far away, some just in their local areas and everything. But boarding schools were there to assimilate you. They were not there to foster the maintenance of your tribal culture or your language. It was assimilate you into being a English-speaking middle-class American and everything like that. So they actually went to an education experience that sometimes used very stiff corporal punishment and other things that inhibited you from speaking your language. But students always found ways to do it out on the playground or somewhere. And there's stories about them like having somebody watch, post a guard, and if a teacher's coming, then they whistle, and then everybody just goes into speaking English, and the teachers are happy, and they go about their way. So, but these kids did not lose their language out of this and everything. In late '39, and we know we're trying to stay out of World War II like we did World War I. But we know we're going to get pulled into it sooner or later. So the Army starts recruiting small groups of natives again, specifically to have them form codes in their languages and to prepare it and have it ready for World War II. So the Oneida and the Chippewa, they're two different tribes, two different languages, but they're units from Michigan and Wisconsin, which were in one division. Comanches were recruited from around Lawton, Oklahoma, very close to you guys, and trained. Meskwaki from Iowa, who, if you've heard the name Sac and Fox, these are the Fox, and their own name for themselves is Meskwaki. So there's a group of them from Tama, Iowa. Then there's some Hopi, which are pulled together from a number of units. And all of these are formed, again, specifically go through basic, go through their advanced infantry training and everything, and then go to communication school and start developing that. So we have these small units of code talkers well before, all trained and ready, even before Pearl Harbor and everything. But they're fairly small forces. There is a series of meetings. Of course, we get involved in the Pacific campaign first, in right after December 7th of 41, but we physically don't invade Europe until D-Day in 44. So the troops that end up going to Europe have a long wait and a lot of training. So the Army has a series of meetings in 43 and 44 prior to D-Day about the idea. They know they have these native communicators, and one of the problems that bothers the Army is that, well, we have no one in the Army who can monitor these messages. None of our officers speak these languages. So what we're doing is we're asking somebody to send communications in a language that we cannot know or monitor, and how do we know that it's accurate or sufficient enough and everything. So it was pointed out that it worked fine in World War I, and there was no issues of security breaches or treason or anything of that nature. But signal intelligence, as one World War II signal intelligence officer told me, you have to be almost paranoid in communications. You have to anticipate every possible situation that could cause you harm. And so the military basically decided, for the most part, the Army decided they will not expand the groups that they already have. They'll just keep those small groups, but they won't expand the program. The Navy tests them and says, well, they work fine, but we just don't really need them for our kind of situation and everything. The Marines in this meeting, which is really interesting, the Marines just kind of pretend like they don't know what they're talking about. But the Marines have already formed their own Code Talker program, and it will be the biggest one ever. And so they're trying to keep theirs very, very, very secret and everything. So the Marines are not sharing with the other branches what they're doing. And so I've always kind of chuckled and thought, how did we win this thing when you have some branches not being forthright with the other ones. So anyway, the Marines will go ahead and utilize the Navajo extensively, but the first group is recruited right at the start of May 1942 and then used in the Pacific. In hindsight, because we had upwards of possibly 44,000 Native American men in World War II, not all of them still spoke their language, but many of them did. I can think of dozens and dozens of men that I worked with and interviewed early on in my career who were fluent speakers of their language to the day they died. So this was in the long run, it's going to be an underutilized tactic. They could have recruited and formed, because like I say, you don't need big groups of them. You just need them in key positions and everything. But unfortunately, a lot of them, they did not expand the programs. Now, a lot of other officers said, well, there may not be an official program, but if I have natives in my unit, I'm going to make use of them. And local company commander has that discretion. So I know many cases of people I talked to and others where they were this job, but they found out they were a fluent speaker of their language, and they just got reassigned and became a radio man. And sometimes it was just 2 guys in one unit, or 4 guys in a unit, or 7 guys in a unit. So this is what I'll later describe as type 1 and type 2 code talkers. Type 1 being having the formal training and the codes, and type 2 is just using fluent native speakers to send messages and everything. So it's kind of incidental code talking, but it's also effective. So this is the setting of what's going on before we really get into war. And then, like I say, in World War II, we really have 2 forms of code talking. The first is with specially devised coded vocabulary. So the Comanches created around 250 terms. Other tribes, we don't have their complete lists, but we have samples of them. The Navajo, we do have the complete word list, and they started with 211 vocabulary terms, but eventually by the war's end had expanded it to 700, a little over 700 code terms and everything. And then the second type, again, is just using fluent speakers without specially devised coded vocabulary. If they can talk around it or about it and get the message across, it was good enough. But both forms I think of as codes, because both the military referred to them and the press referred to that. These are codes that they're using. So in one case, it's just an unknown foreign language that serves as a code. And in another case, it's an unknown foreign language, but you have specially devised vocabulary sprinkled throughout it that only those code talkers will know. Not even the people back home will understand it and everything. But both were effective. Both were perfectly effective. Again, no secrecy, right? So these are newspaper articles from December 18th of 1940 and August 31st of 1941, both again before Pearl Harbor, before we're involved in World War II. So the one group is talking about Michigan and Wisconsin, so this would be the Chippewa and the Oneida, and then Comanches again called for Army Code Service, and it mentions they were used in World War One, and goes on. So again, there just is no effort to cover to keep this secret because they're looking at it from the viewpoint of they don't have the materials, they don't have the access, they cannot break these languages, you know. Now, in reality, any language, any code can be broken if you have enough time. But that's the thing, they were being used and the movements were so quick that there wasn't time to respond to them and everything. Here's an example of some PIMAs who are training as code talkers on the phone there and everything of that nature. And this group I've done some research on, but they actually had members of at least 5 different tribes that were used as communicators in their systems and everything. This group is the 158th Bushmasters that came out of around Phoenix and down in that area of Arizona. So many different tribes in that general area. These are the groups that were type 1 in World War II. So again, they were specifically recruited, formed or recruited, trained in communications, trained to use radios and phones and things, and then sat down and systematically created words for what they needed. And we'll have some samples of those here shortly. All the other groups, which is about 25 other groups, were just using their everyday languages in World War II. So again, this is another photo. It's a photo op, you know. So they've got them wearing kind of plain style headdresses. These are Meskwakis from Iowa. They're really kind of the edge of eastern woodlands, eastern plains natives and everything. So they traditionally didn't have this kind of headdress. But they're using that and showing them sending messages and machine gun practice and things. But these are the 8 men from their reservation that ended up becoming code talkers and everything. And then these are 15 of the 17 Comanches. There are 2 that are not in the picture here, and but at Fort Benning and everything. And I had the good luck to work with 4 of these individuals. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, 4 of these individuals, and also I had audio material of interviews with a 5th one before he passed, and then their training officer I was able to work with as well. And this is Wellington Mycoby. He's running a switchboard at Fort Benning out during training and everything. And this was one of my closest consultants, Forrest Castavoid, and one day he said, you know when I told you about when we took Cherbourg, you know, I said, yeah. He said, well, I took a few things too. Come on out back here. I want to show you, you know. So he had some war memorabilia and things that he shared with me and everything. So, but the interesting story about this flag, when he came home, he wired ahead. The family knew when he's coming, met them at the train station. He started to step down off the train, and his father stopped him. And in Comanche, he said, what did you bring me? Knowing that he'd been to war. So what did he bring back? Well, he dug down in his duffel bag. He pulled that flag out. His father held that flag out, shook it out, you know, gave a hoop, laid it on the sidewalk, and said, now step down and dance in victory. You are home. So his first step off of the train was on this Nazi flag, and his uncles and everyone brought a small drum. They began to sing, and he did a honor dance right there on top of the flag. And so that's a different kind of homecoming, but very very standard of how proud natives are of their veterans and things, and the way they practice some of their culture and traditions and everything. These are 7 Lakotas. They were from different reservations. They did not know each other. The 7th one is taking the picture. They didn't know each other, but they all spoke dialects of the same parent language, so they could understand each other fine. And they became a team of 7. A lot of times they went out in pairs and worked. And they become known as MacArthur's boys because MacArthur did use them to send messages from the Philippines and things of that nature. When he wanted something really secure, he used some of these native gentlemen. But they had very precarious positions. A lot of times they got ahead of the American lines. They crossed through the Japanese lines to get behind the Japanese and then went further in to do reconnaissance. So they were reporting on troop strengths, locations, weaponry, everything you could imagine. As soon as they sent a message, they shut off the radio, the phone, and moved because your signal strength, there's a way of monitoring that which lets you narrow down. It's kind of like where they ping a cell phone today and figure out where it's at. They triangulate it. There was a way of doing that more crudely back then. So you had to send a message and move. And so they were really in a lot of perilous situations behind enemy lines, but they all made it back and everything. But they're known as MacArthur's boys. These are just some different ones. This is Floyd Dan, who's a Hopi. Next to him, 2 of the George Kirk and Henry Bahe, who are Navajo on Bougainville. And then the picture we saw at the start of the talk, another Navajo co-talker on Saipan there. But just showing some of them, showing some of them doing their work on the radios and everything. These are some of the Navajo code talkers in training, in class at Camp Elliott near Fort Pendleton out in California. And so they're studying, actually classes to study and develop the code here and everything of that nature. And then these are 8 of them on a training on, again, Bougainville and Saipan. So the Navajo developed 711 terms eventually, as new things come up and they needed to be able to communicate it. And they formed a triple alphabet. So the alphabets work like this. Let's say I want to say, well, for example, let's say I want to say the word Paris, right? Well, in any dialect, Paris, everybody in the world understands it. Paris, 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 etc. So, like the Comanches, they'd say, Meakuna. Now listen to me. And then they would start just listing a bunch of Comanche words. Each word you translated into English, and you took the first letter of the English translation. So if I wanted to say like a pair of something, like 2 of something, I could use that word Comanche, and I get a P in English. Then I might use the word for ant, rain, ice, snow, and then I just spell out Paris, right? So with the alphabets, you could name any unit, any city, any river. There was, you could communicate about anything and it still be secure. And the Navajo eventually developed a triple alphabet where they had 3 possible words that they could mix, because you don't want to keep using the exact same word for that letter, because the repetition will begin to break the code. There's only a handful of vowels in human languages, and there's more consonants. So they had a triple alphabet that they used. The Comanches had an open alphabet. They could use any word. So you might use like your father's sister as ant, or you might use an ant that's on the ground, right? Or just anything that starts with an A that you can think of. The same way for an S, you could use snake, you could use salt, you could use snow, right? You could use the word sea, and all of those would give you an S. So theirs was even harder to break. If you notice that the guys in the class here, a lot of the Navajo do look fairly Asiatic, and there was a problem with them being mistaken as Japanese and captured by other American troops. Not the guys in their own units, but when they're on moves or in between or running messages, people oftentimes mistook them as Japanese, which had got a Marine clothing and put it on. And that did happen. That was a tactic. And the same way that we had Japanese Americans infiltrating sometimes to do work. So it was precarious based on their looks, that most people could not tell them apart many times from the Japanese. And that's a problem that developed. I'm working on a manuscript on this, but a problem that developed for many, many peoples of color, if you will, during the Second World War. It's the first time they have all met up, been in very tight quarters together, and there's no internet. There's not much of libraries at the time. There's no TV. Most of these people had never seen these other cultures. So we also have accounts of Navajos who couldn't tell some cultures apart. And so it was a very, very confusing time to be in their position and everything. But that was something that was unique to the Pacific. It didn't happen the same way in Europe. Here's a sample of the code words, right? So the code formation, each group did their own in each military unit. There was, again, not an overarching plan, but they're fairly similar in that they just took terms that were based on everyday subjects, something that meant something to them, but it wouldn't really mean anything to anybody else. So, for example, Navajo, atsa, the word eagle, they used that for a transport plane. So they took a lot of birds and just assigned categories, like a reconnaissance plane, very quiet, very slow. They named it an owl. Things that were more like a dive bomber or that kind of thing, more like a sparrowhawk. So they used a lot of natural animals, birds, things of that nature to name things. The Hopi, they're from a desert area, but when they're being on ships going over there, and they look at the ships as a pa'aki. Pa'aki means a house on water, and which is an interesting term, them coming from a desert area. But their reasoning is on a Navy ship, you had a room to eat, you had a room to sleep, you had a room for exercise, you had a medical place to go to. There was literally a room for everything, right? So it was just like a house, except that it was on water. And again, that wouldn't mean anything to anybody back home, but they knew what it meant. Comanches saw a tank as it has a hard shell, it moves slow. It's a wakare, it's a turtle and everything. So they just created different descriptions or references to things like that to create their code words. And again, it's only stuff that they knew and agreed upon. These are some of the Comanche code words. So I remember them asking, how did you form the code terms? They said, well, we're kind of in a Quonset hut, and we'd have folding chairs. We'd all sit in a circle, and Lieutenant Foster would say, okay, what's the word for gun? And they say, tawoi, tawoi is a gun. He said, okay, that would be a rifle. And they're like, yeah. And they're like, okay, how about a machine gun? Oh, that's tawoi, How about a pistol? Oh, tawoi, And he said, no, we got to be more specific, So then he said, 30 caliber machine gun. Give me a word for it. Make a word for it, And they sit there and they discuss it in Comanche, and then they turn around. And one of them said, okay, we got it. We're going to call it Tutsakana Tawoi. So what does that mean? Well, it means a sewing machine gun. Why are you calling it a sewing machine gun? Well, because when you fire them, they go, and it sounds about like a Singer sewing machine when you pump the treadle and get the wheel up to speed. My grandma and mom used them all the time, and it resembles that. Well, that's not going to mean anything to anybody else. Then for a 50 caliber, they just added a prefix, big, pia tutsaka tawoi. Big sewing machine gun, right? A grenade was simply called a small explosion. Mortars, they called it a stove gun. Nakotu tawoi. And they said, well, why a stove gun? And they said, well, one of them back home, his uncle, when he built his house, he cut, he put the wood stove in and everything, but he cut the hole for the smokestack. It's off. And so the pipe is actually kind of bent going out of the roof. And it reminds them of a mortar, which is an inclined pipe type figure. So again, just everyday things. It didn't matter what you called it, just something you could agree upon and everything. They even had a word for Adolf Hitler. You could see there at the bottom. So they called him Positivo, crazy white man. So they could literally talk about him on the radio and had a code term for him and everything. But this is how they do it. Howitzers, they would just use the words for numbers like 88 big gun, and that would tell you it's an 88 howitzer. A 105, they would literally say 105 big gun, and there was nothing that they could not communicate. Modern equipment, military stuff, towns, names, etc. So it was a very well put together code. Um, this is a group of Hopi from Arizona. There were 8 of them in this Army unit. 3 of them, and this is something that never come up, was out there doing field work with the families. These gentlemen are all gone by the time I was able to go out there. But the wife of one of them was telling me, they said, yeah, Frank, and they said Warren, and there was another one. 3 of them were from the village of Tewa, which is on First Mesa. Hopi has 4 mesas and multiple villages on each mesa. And he said, he told me when they talked on the radio, they always talked in Tewa because that was their first language, but they also spoke Hopi fluently. So when 3 of them were using Tewa, and then when they spoke to any of the other 5, they spoke Hopi. So they were actually using 2 languages in a group of 8 men. Again, very difficult to pin that down or know what to do with it if you're the enemy and everything. A very, very interesting story. This is a record that we came across in 2010. There was some damage to a family's shed, and they took out the trunk, and they remembered their father, the gentleman in the upper right there in the uniform. He had passed away in 1970. He died still fairly young after World War II. And they remembered a big box, and they would get the big box down, and that's where the toys were. And they'd put the toys out on the floor, and the kids could play. But there was a little wooden box in there, and he never let the kids. That was hands off. Always leave. That's Dad's little wooden box. Don't touch it. Don't ask. Etc. Well, literally 40 years after he passed, they had that fire, and they took everything out. It wasn't a bad fire, but they discovered that box again, that little wooden box, and they never knew what it was. Well, they opened it up, and there were some letters. He had his medals and ribbons and some different things in there, a lot of his personal stuff, military stuff. But there were two envelopes folded, and they were so sticky he couldn't open them, so they steamed them and got them open. And they open up this chart, and it says secret top and bottom, and then it says VBC in the middle, and you start seeing these code words. Well, you look at the arrows, and each group there's a number, and those numbers are the bomb squadrons of the 5th Bomb Command. And then you see that there's 2 natives at almost all the positions. So they looked over and they saw their dad's name, Orville Wadsworth Hopi, and he is paired up with Paul Histia from Acoma. Well, if you follow the arrows, Orville Wadsworth goes over here to Rex Puyuma, who's Hopi. And then his partner is Nelson Danford, an Apache. And so then that is connected to an Apache guy down here. Acoma and Laguna are the same language, neighboring pueblos. It goes up to them. It's a radio net in Hopi, Acoma, Apache, Crow, Sioux, Laguna, Chippewa, and maybe another language. We're not sure. This is pure genius. There's no way you're ever going to break this. And it allows you to pass messages. So if I'm a Hopi guy, I can get a message in Hopi. I can tell my partner in English, and then he puts it into Apache and sends it on. And so it was a genius way of sending messages and everything. And Rex Puyuma was still alive at this time, so they went over to see him and kind of got the whole story about it. So the Air Force, they have no record of this, no knowledge of it in their files or anything. So they got in touch with them, and they said, your father was really not supposed to take these, but we're sure glad he did, And so it was a treasure trove to run into this and everything. And the Hopis contacted all the other families, traced these men down, and they were able to get 8 or 9 of the other families and have kind of a reunion. None of these people had ever met each other. And then the Wadsworths also, they realized why Orville's son is named Nelson Danford Wadsworth. This Apache guy was a real close friend of his, and so he named his first son after his friend in the war and everything. And so there's a lot of family history and things. But this is a really unique document. This is just a list of units that served in World War II. And you just see they're everywhere. They're in the Aleutian Islands. They're in the Philippines. Um, there's some that are in other Pacific islands. Let's see, where else? Europe, of course, North Africa, just all over the place and everything that these groups were using and everything. Some of them were Type 1 code talkers. Most of them were Type 2. And then again, some of the units we know how many men were used. Some we really don't know, because most of this was not documented. It was intentionally created and just kind of done off the books as a tactic and everything. Forms of recognition. So following World War II, there really wasn't, again, any recognition or anything. The Navajo, one of the popular myths is, again, that all code talkers were sworn to secrecy and all these kind of things. Well, of course, they were smart enough during the war that you don't pass this around, of course. But members of several groups told me, they said, no, we were never given any orders or anything like that after the war. And they'd already ran the newspaper articles, so it really wasn't a secret anyway. The Navajo, though, did try really, really hard to keep their entire code secret, right? But when you have a few hundred men involved, eventually something's going to leak out. And so there were some leaks, a couple of them even during the war and then afterwards. But what they did basically was they classified the code. They told the men not to talk about it. They went home, went about their business. The code books were kept under lock and key until 1969, really 68, when they were declassified and released. But by that time, word of it had already leaked out. I found somewhere around 45 to 50 articles mentioning the use of the Navajo code talkers following the war. So between 45 and 68. So it was still attempted, but it was mostly the code books that were under classification. So the Navajo are recognized by the Marine Corps in '69, and that starts the first really kind of formal recognition. The state, like for example, the Choctaws and the Comanches are recognized by the state of Oklahoma in '86 and '89, and this is stirring up other groups to say, well, we need to do something for our guys, and then there will be federal recognition finally in 2000 and 2008. And we're going to see just a few slides of some of the modern thing. This is the Navajo Code Talker statue at Window Rock in northeast Arizona corner. So if you're ever up in that area, it's really something to see. And right over the hill, they have an excellent museum, the tribal museum, but it's really something to see. So there is the statue at Window Rock. The code talkers, the Navajo code talkers, formed their own association. Now, they were big enough, they were upwards of 420 men. About 285 were used in combat. The others were trained, and some of them were still stateside, some were still Hawaii and different posts to relay messages and everything. But they formed around 1971 their own veterans organization with very distinct yellow uniforms and red hats and Navajo jewelry. And they become very, very famous, going around the country and participating in parades, historical observances, talking at schools and things of that nature. And then this is them when they have their annual meeting. They would, all those that could, would walk the route to the statue and where they had their annual celebration, and those that couldn't would ride in a car and everything. This is some of the tribal recognition, a plaque for the Hopi code talkers. I was asked to come out and speak when they dedicated that. A medal. The Choctaw said, we got tired of waiting on something from the U.S., so we just made our own medal, and they did. So it's a medal for service and honor that they awarded to their code talkers. This is the Comanche statue spirit talker. So you have this old style warrior who is kind of forming out of a whirlwind or a smoke trail, if you will, and he's leaning over the code talker's shoulder as if he's speaking through him in a sense, And these are pictures of some of their code talkers. And then the Choctaw have a memorial down here in the corner, one memorial for their veterans and code talkers and things. So there's been a lot of different kinds of tribal recognition, and this is still going on. There have been stretches of highways named, and again, certain statuary and things like that that are very very aesthetically dynamic. They're really visited a lot and everything. This is where the state of Oklahoma recognized the Choctaws and the Comanches in 1989. There's been several small museum exhibits now appearing in the last 20 years or so on different code talkers, usually the code talkers that are in the immediate area, or sometimes just a general exhibit on code talkers in general. In 2000 and 2001, the Congressional Gold Medal. Now, this is not the Medal of Honor. The Congressional Medal of Honor is a combat action, a combat award and everything. Congressional Gold and Silver Medals are the highest award that Congress can bestow upon a U.S. citizen, and it can really be it's for anything that has a lasting, enduring impact on the culture. And so when you think about the amount of lives, and the Navajo Code Talkers definitely helped shorten the Pacific Campaign and were crucial in many campaigns and everything, give us a distinct advantage. But it can also be scientists, artists, writers, poets, these sports people, these kinds of people. But the Navajo Code Talkers were chosen in 2000 and awarded in 2001. There were 6 of the original 29 that received the gold medal, and then all the others received a silver medal. And rightly so. I mean, long overdue. Many of these men had already passed on by this time. Well, that, of course, stirred up interest among the other groups. Well, what about our guys? We had guys in World War I, well before the Navajo, and we had guys in World War II, And so in 2002, my book on the Comanche Code Talkers came out. And at that time, excuse me, at that time I had, excuse me, I had not necessarily planned to continue working on a code talker subject, but I received a call the year after the book came out, and to go up and testify on a Senate committee panel in Washington, D.C. at the Capitol. So I'm there with the vice chairman of the Comanche Nation and the chief of the Choctaw Nation right beside me, Greg Pyle. And so we each had a 15-minute period to testify. And so I presented, they wanted me, because I was really the only academic person that was doing anything on the non-Navajo Code Talkers, and that's where they found me. And so it was to testify and present any and all information on everyone and each group that had served as a Code Talker. So I've always joked, and I said, I had my name and our school name on 15 Minutes on C-SPAN, so my 15 minutes of fame are over, and it's all been downhill since. No, that's just for fun, but it was an extraordinary experience and everything, getting to meet all these people and the common interest and everything. So eventually, it took 4 years to get the act passed. It took a while to get through both the House and Senate and everything. And then once it was finally passed in 2008, they began to design medals. And at first, the government was just going to issue a standard code talker medal to every tribe. And the tribe said, absolutely not. It's going to be something about us and our own. So each tribe was allowed to design, and they worked with the U.S. Mint, but to design and to come up with a design that was doable, but also culturally appropriate for the tribe. So you can see the Choctaw medal here, the Cherokee medal, and then the Comanche medal. And so there's been 34 of these, I think, made so far. And these are some of the Choctaw officers looking at pictures and going over the design plan and everything of that nature. But each tribe is specific. It has things written in their language. It has symbols that belong to their tribe or their clans, things like that. Sometimes things from their tribal seal. So I went back up in 2013 for the actual medal ceremony. So 33 tribes were recognized that day. 25 of them received their medals. The others were still in the planning. And we just finished one more the other day. I'm on the board that um, oversees the design and of Native American coinage and any kind of Native American medals for the U.S. Mint. I serve on that committee. So this is the wards here. Some of the Lakotas with pictures of their ancestors, but they're holding the silver medal that they were awarded for each family. This is the Choctaw receiving their medal that day, the Choctaw officers. And then Edmund Harjo, who I got to visit twice and everything, but he was the only surviving code talker who was physically able to travel and receive it and everything. And you can imagine the applause and everything that he received. It was just astounding and everything. But I was able to visit with him again after the ceremony and get some pictures of him with his medal and everything. There's been popular culture recognizing code talkers. So Pendleton blankets with a Navajo code talker blanket. There is a native illustrator in Oklahoma that has done a book, like a comic book, on the Choctaw code talkers, which is great for kids because it's a comic book and it's entertaining, but yet it still conveys history and culture and everything. There's a G.I. Joe doll that's Navajo that does 7 messages in English and Navajo. And then there's been coins, even American currency. There's a code talker coin now and everything that's been made. So there's been a series of things in the popular world too to commemorate the Choctaws. The movie Wind Talker, some of you may have seen. It focuses on the Navajo, particularly on the taking of Saipan. It's accurate for the most part, except the main storyline. And the writers knew this going into it. The real story is that the Navajos were being deployed, and again, not the guys in their own company, their mates, but they would be running a message coming back from a patrol or something, and other people would see them, other American troops, and think that they were Japanese and take them as bodyguards. So that's why they started putting a white bodyguard with the Navajo code talker. It was not to shoot him. It was not fear of imminent capture, that kind of thing. It was basically to vouch for him so he would be left alone, because they were taking these guys prisoner and holding them for hours until they could finally be vetted, and that meant the loss of their communication. The whole purpose for them being there was their language and everything. So the movie did still raise awareness of the Navajo code talkers, but it had to change the storyline to make it sellable and everything. Why did code talking work? Okay, the languages are little known. And even from a native standpoint, most native groups do not know the languages of all their neighboring groups and everything. Sometimes you get somebody that speaks 2 or 3, but from a European standpoint, these languages are really little known. They're very obscure. They're only here in North America. Most of them were unwritten at the time. Now, Cherokees, Choctaws, Comanches, their language was written at the time, but it was mostly just like for Bibles, for hymn books. It was things for local consumption. It wasn't the kind of things that would have been in university libraries or libraries in Germany or Paris or somewhere of this nature. So they're originally unwritten, largely. They're full active languages, so they're not based on mathematical code principles. It's not like where, okay, today I'm going to use a 7, or let's say I'll use a W today to represent the letter A. I'll use the letter Z to represent an F, and I'm just shuffling and reassigning meaning. It's not that kind of a cipher or a code. It's a full fluent language with all its complexities. The languages are not based on European languages, right? So you can't really compare them like Spanish and Italian and French and things. You can start seeing cognates, and even with English, you see a lot of cognates and things. Um, there's nothing to compare it to that they have access to. The syntax is different too. The word order, the abbreviations, agglutinations, things like that, is the structure is very different in some of the native languages. And they're not all the same. One native language doesn't work the way this one works. So again, it's just more and more complex from a European standpoint. And then when you develop the code terms and put them in the language, then you've got a double code. You've got an unknown, very obscure language, and then you have all this special coded vocabulary buried in that language. And so again, even even people back home could not understand it and everything. And we have some cases of that, you know. So a little over 33 groups serving as it. And again, it's faster, it's more secure, and that gave us a tremendous military advantage and everything like that during the wars. None of the codes were ever broken. There are inquiries by the Germans. In World War One, captured German officers said, you know, we heard what you were speaking, but we've never, you know, one of them said, we have the finest linguists in the world, know all the major world languages. We never heard anything like this. What was it? And of course, they just chuckled and they said, well, it was just American. You know, they didn't tell them it was a native language or anything. One of the more interesting side stories of the Code Talkers is that when Bataan fell in April of 42, there was a lot of Native Americans in the New Mexico Coast Artillery Unit that was in the Philippines, and they got swept up, and some of them went to the Bataan Death March and that kind of thing, Camp Donaldson, but there was a lot of that were captured there. And so Joe Kiumi was a Navajo who was a very fluent speaker. And at first they beat him because they thought he was Japanese American. He looked to the Japanese, he looked Japanese. And so they thought he was a Japanese American. So they beat him, they called him a traitor and everything. And he yelled back at him, you know, I'm not Japanese, I'm American Indian, I'm a Navajo, you know. And they kind of left him alone after a while. Sent him on a hell ship to Japan, so he was a slave labor. But in the winter of 44, they came and got him and pulled him into a room, and they had recordings of the Navajo code talkers sending messages. And they said, we think this is, tell us what this is, because they remembered he said he was Navajo. Well, he was captured 2 weeks before the first class of code talkers was even recruited from the reservation. He had no idea that there were Navajo code talkers, had never heard their messages, did not know anything that they even existed. So he listened to it and he said, well, yeah, it is my language. I can make some of it out, but it doesn't make sense. It's like gibberish, you know, they're talking about animals and seashells and stuff like this, you know. And so they didn't believe him. They tortured him very, very severely. But as a fluent speaker, as good as any of those other men, he could not break that code and everything. So that proves the value and the strength of these systems. So again, the Navajo code was classified till 68. There's no indication that other tribes actually had those formal orders. They just didn't talk about during the war, but after they were free to, and there was plenty of press, you know. These are just some of the gentlemen over the years that I knew and interviewed. Mr. Stone Road, who was Pawnee, was in New Guinea, and Mr. Clarence Wolfguts, he was at Ungar and near Peleliu and some of those campaigns. These are two of the Navajos I work with. Chester Nez was the last of the original 29, the ones that first formed the code. And then Mr. Holiday I worked with very closely there at the bottom there. And he was mistaken 3 times as a Japanese person and captured. And so he had a really interesting war experience and everything. Again, the irony is that both wars, these kids, the vast majority of them, not every single one, the vast majority went through boarding schools, Indian boarding schools, which did not permit them to use their language and everything. And so they were resilient enough to hang on to it. And Albert Smith told a story, Navajo, that he was put in the boarding school out near Tuba City, Arizona, and he was determined he would not lose his language. And so he would go out on the playground and he would talk to things in his mind. He would talk to trees, grass, rocks, bugs, anything. But he would talk in his mind in Navajo so that he never lost the use of the language and everything. And of course, the teachers had no way of knowing what he was doing. So very resilient to hang on to these languages and everything. I did this book, should be 2021. I'm sorry for the error there, but I did a book on all the World War One code talkers, and then I'm working progressively. There's so many groups in World War II. It's a big project, but I'm getting closer and closer to finishing that one. And there's still research to be done. Every year you'll go for a while, you don't find anything, but then you keep looking and I'll get lucky enough and I'll find some more data buried in an archive or an audio interview in some little county museum or something. So there's still things out there. They just have to be uncovered. So with that, I want to thank you so much for your invitation to speak, and I would be more than happy to take any questions or discussion, anything that you all might have that's of interest to you.
Yes, we have a few questions. I want to say thank you for your time and sharing this information. The first question we have is, so how long did it take for the countries or just the units, the people in the units to learn the language to make this effective?
Most of the time it was done in about 6 weeks, 6 to 8 weeks of just working on the coding. But they continued periodically to have practice sessions. And so like in the Comanches in their diaries and things, I found where they say they're still stateside, but today we went out to practice that code. And so they don't really talk about it overtly, but and then the Navajo, in between campaigns, they had several times where they pulled the code talkers back to a joint location, and sometimes it might be 40 or 50 of them in a group, just to practice and reinforce it. And then sometimes there might be a couple new terms introduced. Then they would go back to their assignments. So, but usually 6 to 8 weeks to get the core of it down. And then, like I say, they did do refreshers, or what we might say kind of enhancement practice as time went along.
Next question. So how were mail delivery runners were selected, since they were heavily targeted? I was just curious how the selection process was with that.
Okay, say that again. How were?
Well, just curious, how were mail delivery runners selected? When people join the military, it's kind of how do they just get that job?
Yeah, usually, well, once you go through basic and then your advanced training, you get some type of what they call an MOS, a military occupation specialization. So, you're a rifleman, you're a cook, you're a radio operator, and then in the signal company, you're going to have certain people that are just messengers, and so that's their job, is to run messages and do things like that. Now, they also know how to use a phone, how to use, they know all the things in that unit. But usually your runners are going to be guys that are, they're fairly thin, they're very fast, and it's not based on ethnicity or anything of that nature. You had some natives that were messengers, you had white guys, you had Hispanics, things of that nature. But usually it's going to be somebody who's fairly, trim, very speedy, that gets that kind of assignment.
You would think that they would get a higher incentive for having that job compared to some of the other jobs, though. I would assume.
Hey, Bill, will you stop sharing your screen so we can get you bigger on the screen?
Oh yeah. Let's see. Sorry. Stop sharing. Let's see if I can figure out how to do this now. Let's see here. Yeah, bear with me just a second. Oh, share. Okay. Um, manage access. Okay.
It's fine. Don't worry about it.
Okay. Yeah, I'm trying to shut it off, and I just don't know how.
It's okay. It's fine. So I had a question. Do we think that
There we
there could? Oh, there we go. Do we think that there could be a
Mhm.
better movie about this done?
Oh, definitely. Yes, yes. It's like I say, when they made Wind Talkers, they had several Navajo code talkers who were consultants and everything, And so they said, the technical parts, the equipment, all that. Uh, the Navajo guy said, it's pretty much right on. He said a few of John Woo's, John Woo's a big action guy, director, but he said a few of his explosions are a little bigger than they really were. Um, but a couple of them said, "I wish we'd have had grenades like that." But they knew that if you made a movie about Marines who can't recognize their own men, that would kind of suggest that they're it's ridiculous, But people, no one has really went back and looked at the reasons why so many of these guys were mistaken, and that's what I'm trying to finish a manuscript on and do. It wasn't just code talkers, it wasn't just Native Americans, Filipino Americans, Korean Americans, Chinese, Hispanics, many people like that. People had actually never met that culture. You got farm boys from Iowa, you got people from Tennessee, that's never met anyone that's Hispanic, and then suddenly they're thrown in the army, and then they're over in Asia with all these different cultures and tribes and things, and you have a split second to make a decision sometimes. So it's a very confusing thing. Now, the thing I discovered though, as soon as they vetted the person and they found out they were American Indian, that's great. And some of the guys said, "Oh, sorry, Chief." They said, "Let me carry your radio for you." So it wasn't really a racial thing as much as it was a misidentification because they thought they were the enemy. But as soon as they were identified as an American and on this side, the malice, there was no malice. And so it's a very thing. But yes, a better movie really does need to be made. And I have talked to a couple people. There are a couple people interested in doing it from the Comanche perspective in Europe. Now, they didn't have the misidentification problem over there. They didn't need bodyguards and things, but just a more accurate, better movie about code talkers. But yeah, it definitely needs to be done at some point.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for this fascinating research. Are there any more questions in here?
Yeah, I think that might be all the questions we have.
Okay.
Well, it has been super fascinating to learn more. And I had a question real quick. Can you tell a little bit about your role now working with Comanches and veterans that you do ongoing from your bio?
Sure. Well, I think probably like my seventh book is in the mill from Texas A&M. I didn't give it to Oklahoma.
Yay! Good. Yay!
Yay! All right. So, but 5 of my 7 books are focused on some aspect of Native veterans and everything. So I've been working with the Comanche Indian Veterans Association for a number of years, and see some of the earlier members were the actual code talkers. Who I started with, and I've just become very close with them. They just include me in everything. And so the historian, who's also a very dear friend and a longtime consultant of mine, he decided to retire. He was in the military for 24 years, and then 5 in the service thing, and then 26 with the Comanche Indian veterans. And so they invited me to a breakfast one day. It's kind of a funny story. They invited me to a breakfast, and we had been putting in some markers, the bronze markers on some deceased veterans' graves that morning, and we all went and had breakfast. And there was about 11 or 12 of the guys, and George Red Elk was talking to me. He was the president at the time, and his dad. I think George liked me because he knew I knew his dad. I was close to his dad, But we just hit it off. And anyway, he said, "Well, we've been talking about something, and Lanny's going to retire as the historian for the veterans group, and we would like you to fill that position. Would you be willing? Would you accept to become the historian for the Comanche Indian Veterans Society?" And I looked at him, the other guys were all nodding at me and everything. And I said, well, I just want to ask a couple things because I want everything to be clear. I said, I don't want to encroach. I don't want to step on toes. I don't want to, go beyond what I should be and everything. And he said, okay, what's your questions? I said, well, George, I'm not Comanche. And he kind of chuckled. He said, I think we picked up on that somewhere along the way, and the guys are all laughing, they'd already made up their mind. And I said, and I'm not a veteran. I said, now, literally everybody in my family is a veteran. But I said, I had a health thing that came up at 10 and I could never be a veteran. And he said, we don't care about that. You're with us now. And so that's how I become the historian for them and everything. But it's a really rewarding position because I know many of the families and the individuals, and I've interviewed probably a good 25 or 30 of the members in the organization, like their complete military service history and then post-war, that kind of thing, which is related to other research, and so I've done a paper on them about a special status or rank that they have associated with the organization that's based on traditional culture. I've done another article on how they see belonging to that organization and its different activities, how that helps them with PTSD. And because there's several of these guys, Vietnam, but also more recently, like Iraq and Afghanistan, that have some pretty tough levels of PTSD, but the organization has a lot of ways of helping them that works for them better than a non-Indian psychiatrist or psychologist or that kind of approach, because it's all based off of their culture. And so that's something that hasn't been looked at as a particular organization. So, but yeah, I just got back. They just had their annual Veterans Day dance, and I participated with them all through it. And I went to France with them this summer. We went to Utah Beach where the Comanche Code Talkers actually landed and had prayers and services and offerings there and everything for the 80th anniversary of D-Day. And so I just love it. And there's other groups I work like this as well, but they made a place for me is the best way I could say it.
That's
And,
so wonderful. Well, I'm glad that you made a place for us today to come and speak with us today. We're so happy. And so thank you so much, and we'll stay in touch. We can't wait to see your newest book. Thank you.
Okay, all right, thanks. And if you
Okay,
need any, if anybody wants any articles on some of this, I've got things I could digitally email you, and you can share with anybody. So just let me know
Absolutely.
if anybody wants any more material. I'm more than happy to provide it. So
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Have a good day.
okay, see you guys.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.